This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library. As a part of our oral history project, I have today Keith Miller here at the library. And although he's a long-term Marshall product, he now lives out of state. But at that, we're going to hear from Keith. So with that, Keith, you're on.
Hi, Damian. I would say that I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, at the St. Anthony's Hospital. I was born on the 21st of August of 1940. My parents were Herman and Joy Miller. My maternal grandparents were Harry and Lucy Lichtenberger, and my paternal grandparents were, my gracious, Grandma and Grandpa Lichtenberger. I'm like Grandma and Grandpa Miller. My sister was my only sibling, and she was Stephanie Lee Miller Dixon. I was a native of, or am a native of Marshall. I came to Marshall from the hospital shortly after I was born, and lived my entire life in Marshall before I left for college at 415 North 7th Street in Marshall, Illinois. It's a home that my mother and dad built in probably 1937.
And going back now, looking at that particular house in that area, how has that neighborhood changed since you were a little boy?
The neighborhood where I grew up is basically very much the same. It's a very nice neighborhood. Homes seem to be well taken care of, and I think probably neighbors communicate with each other. I know they did when I was a little boy. No one is living there now who was living when I was a young boy. I know that Jerry Tarble is living in the house next door to ours. John Tarble, yes, John Tarble. And Joe Rich, she's no longer Joe Rich. I don't know her new name.
Veda.
Okay, she lives in the house catty cornered across the street, and that's the house that Virginia Root lived in when I was a little boy. And Virginia Root is the wife, I believe, of Chapman Root, who patented the shape of the Coke bottle. So that was an interesting story. When I was a little boy, I probably much like other little boys in Marshall, had a bicycle. We rode all over town. We went out in the woods and spent days watching an anthill, and just learning about what was around us. I started working for my Aunt Salma and Uncle Ralph, who owned a grocery store, really when I was in the first grade. I'd go down, my mother would take me down every Saturday morning around 8 o'clock, and she'd come pick me up around 9 o'clock Saturday night. And the first several years that I worked for Aunt Sam and Uncle Ralph, I spent lots of time playing with the neighborhood boys, and we did all sorts of silly things.
Keith, their last name was George.
Selma and Ralph George. And Aunt Selma was my mother's sister. But as time went on, I really did in fact work at Aunt Selma's store. And candled eggs, for example, people now don't know what it means to candle an egg. But what that was, you had a box that had a hole in it. You set the egg in the hole with a light on, and if you saw a chicken inside, you said that egg's not any good. You throw it away. I took orders over the telephone, and at noontime, Aunt Salma and I would drive all over town delivering groceries to elderly people. I learned how to take the orders over the telephone and add up the bills. Didn't have a cash register, didn't have an adding machine. You added, the numbers like you were supposed to.
Did you have like a little order pad that you kept in for each individual?
Yes. Yeah, we had a little book for every customer, and we just kept a running account in that book. And at some point in time, they settled up. They'd either come in the store and settle up, or they'd pay us when we delivered their groceries.
I know where that store was, but you might mention where that store was. The building is still there.
That store is basically still there. It was at the southeast corner of Archer Avenue and 2nd Street. And it's now, I think, a Title Title Company or something like that.
Yeah,
But
I think-
for years and years and years, it was my uncle Ralph's filling station and Uncle Ralph and Aunt Salma's grocery store.
Was that a DX
It was
station?
it was a DX station, yes it was. Same station as my dad owned, same type of station as my dad owned. And an interesting thing about working in the store was you got to know all of the customers. And a lot of our customers were people who lived in the country. And they would come in, they would bring eggs, they bring potatoes, they bring tomatoes, and they would, Aunt Selma would credit them with bringing in 5 dozen eggs, and then they get credit, and with that credit, they'd buy canned goods and things that they didn't raise themselves. It was a bartering system that we don't have any longer.
I remember my grandparents, especially my grandfather, using the term, "We're going to Saturday downtown for trading." And that's really what it was.
And that's exactly what it was. And Saturdays were really busy because that's when the farmers took the day off. When they come into Marshall to do their shopping. And there were lots of places to shop in Marshall at that time. We had clothing stores, we had groceries, we had lots of restaurants.
But also at that time, there were a number of small grocery stores.
Oh my heavens, right across.
All over town.
Right across the street from us was, I think, Croc's grocery store. And I know when I was, at one point in time, my girlfriend was Sandra Klein, and her uncle, Foster Blizzard, had a grocery store. And the Washburns had a grocery store, and
Went out on 2nd Street also.
beg pardon?
There was one on 2nd Street.
Well, that's where Croc's was.
No, they were down by the Catholic Church, by Kirchner's.
Oh, okay.
Can't think now who had that one. McConkey. No?
No, it wasn't McConkey's.
It's Judy McConkey now. It's her. Conomocker.
Oh, Conomockers, okay.
They had that for a while.
I'll be darned. That's amazing. That really is. So anyway, I worked for Aunt Selma and Uncle Ralph. I can't say all the way through high school, but probably up until my beginning of my freshman year. I worked for them every Saturday. I also, during the summertime, I'd walk down to my father's filling station. He had a DX station, also on Archer Avenue on the other end of town, down around between 11th and 12th Street, I think it was. And I spent a lot of time working for Daddy. I pumped gas, I washed windshields on cars, I checked oil. I remember gasoline being 7.5 and 9.5 cents a gallon.
$1 fill it up.
$1 would fill it up. It was amazing. And I worked at that station with my dad until he built his new station out of New Route 40 and Route 1. And we'll get to that later. Also, during the summertime, when I was starting really in my second year of school, a second grader, I started mowing yards. And by the time I was in the 4th grade, I was mowing 23 yards a week. And I was doing it with a hand mower. And I mowed all over town. I'd push my mower all over town and mow yards. And my most I ever got for a yard was $2, and I did lots of yards for a quarter and 50 cents. And
Did you do it by the hour or by the job?
I just by the job. And when I mowed yards, I trimmed with hand trimmers. I trimmed hedge with big hedge trimmers, and we didn't have electrical tools back then. So that's how I learned to work. And it was interesting. The first yard I mowed was when I was in first grade was for Mary Cole and her mother. And Cole came over. I called him Cole and Mama Cole. That was not a sign of disrespect. They were Cole and Mama Cole. That was that was what we called them, and it was a sort of an honorary title, I guess. But Cole came over and said, "Joy," my mother's name, said, "Joy, Keith wants to mow our yard, and he's so little. Did you tell him he had to do this?" My mother said, "No, he wants to do it." And Cole let me mow it, and I mowed her yard all the way through high school and up until I left for college. And And that was, those were my younger years. I was in Cub Scouts. My mother was a den mother, and just really enjoyed the Cub Scouts. We had a wonderful time. My mother was very creative and created all sorts of activities for us to do.
Now, Keith, knowing where you lived, I bet you went to the North Side School too, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I went to the North Side School, and I will have to say that I had to walk to school. And it was 10 miles each way uphill both ways. The snow was 40 feet deep, and it was 98 degrees outside. It was no, it was funny. It was just
2 doors away.
2 doors away.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful school. It was a beautiful school. Everybody who's lived in Marshall as long as for as long as the years as I am old remembers the school. It was right smack dab in the middle of the block. It was at one time an academy for young ladies, and the yard was cordoned off into different sections for each class to have their playground.
But they didn't have a lot of fancy equipment out there either.
We had teeter-totters,
A swing
and
set.
a merry-go-round, and a swing set, and that was it. And we went out, we ran, we fell down, we got hurt. The teacher came up and gave us a big hug and patted us on the head and said we'd be okay. And the fact that the teacher hugged us, that was considered just an honor to have the teacher hug you when you got hurt. It was different then.
Do you remember your teachers?
Oh, yes. My first grade teacher was Mrs. Phoenix. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Connerton. My third grade teacher was Irene Klein, and Mrs. Klein lived across the street from Aunt Salma's store. So I had known Mrs. Klein for a very, very long time, and she was special.
I went the first 4 years there, and those are the same teachers that I had.
Well, my fourth grade teacher was Barbara Keegan.
Okay. I had Ethel Hutchison from fourth grade.
Okay. Barbara Keegan was brand new out of college, and every boy in the fourth grade fell absolutely head over heels in love with Mrs. Keegan. We all wanted to marry her. And then in the fifth grade, I had Mary Alice Irwin. And my sixth grade teacher was supposed to be Mrs. Bennett, Irene Bennett, but she got promoted to teaching seventh grade. So Mrs. Irwin, Mary Alice Irwin, got promoted with us to the sixth grade. So she was their fifth and sixth grade teacher. She was a spectacular teacher. She did things like she'd bring huge black snakes to school with her, because she and her husband lived on a farm, and so she brought these black snakes and toads and turtles, and the girls got to the point where they could be sitting at their desk, and the snake could crawl across their desk, and that would be just fine. They'd pet it and they'd go on its way. She taught us about nature, and she taught us, arithmetic and English and grammar and literature, and we learned a lot when we were kids in school back then.
Now, you didn't have cafeteria service.
No.
I'll bet you went on home for lunch, didn't you?
Well, I went home for lunch. A lot of kids went home for lunch because we all live very close.
It's close.
A lot of kids brought their lunch. Kids from the country brought their lunch. They'd sit at their desk and eat lunch. But so that was pretty awesome. That pretty much takes care, I think, of grade school.
Do you remember kind of what the school looked like?
Oh, it looked like it was a beautiful, beautiful, tall brick building. Had stone lintels in the windows. It had a central core, which all of the classrooms fed off of that core. And that's sort of what made the school a fire trap. And at some point in time, after they had a fire in Chicago that killed hundreds of children, Linda's dad, who was on the school board, and Charlie Bush decided that we had to get rid of those schools. And so they built the new North Side and the new South Side school.
Did you have Vaughn Arney for music?
No, we had, I think it was Mrs. Jeffers
Oh.
for music. Vaughn Arney didn't start with us until we got into junior high.
When I was in the first and second grade, Arnie came and we went up to the third floor, which was the attic,
Yes.
and had music classes up
Yeah,
there.
I can't remember. I knew we had an attic, and I don't remember that we had music up there, but we might have had. But it was we had, as I recall, one of our periods in the day was music, and we would sit in a class and we would sing, and we just learned all the old songs. She'll be coming around the mountain, and songs like that
Sure.
that were important in our parents' lives, and it became important in our lives. And it was, we learned to appreciate art. We all had art lessons in school. We'd draw, and kids were respectful of the teachers. They didn't talk
Don't you
back to
think you
them.
had to use your mind a little more about an imagination then, especially with art, than what maybe they teach today? I don't know.
We were encouraged to think on our feet. We learned about our country. We learned the history of the United States. We learned about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. That became part of what we knew, and I think that was so important. We learned to respect the soldiers.
Oh, yeah.
And what they did. I was in started grade school right near the end of World War II. But I grew up, being born in 1940, all through from the time I was old enough to remember, I'd go stand out in the backyard and watch P-38s and P-51 Mustangs fly over by the hundreds on their way to the war in Europe. And I knew exactly what they were. I knew where they were going and why they were going there. My dad was in the Army when I was a little boy, so I remember him being gone, and I remember him sending me one of his Army ties, and I wore his Army tie with my overalls when I mowed yards, because it was my dad's tie.
It was a badge.
It was my badge. It was my badge.
Now, do you remember also the blackouts during the war? This may have been after your...
I don't really remember
Okay.
very well.
I'm gonna say this-
I know.
This would have been about 1943,
Well,
maybe four. but more
I
43.
sort of remember that.
Okay.
I do know that after the war was over, we had practice sessions in grade school, the north side, as if what we would do if they dropped an atomic bomb, and we dove under our desk and sat and curled up under our desk for a period of time. That was how we were going to save our lives, and there was an atomic bomb attack.
Now they do that for tornado drills.
In Oklahoma we do that for tornado drills.
Well, I guess we got hung up a little bit here on grade school and all, but I mean, to me, that's such an early part of Marshall. When did you move out of the grade school from maybe another school?
Well, I moved at the end of the sixth grade. We went to junior high in the old Marshall High School that was blown away during a tornado, and I think everyone in Marshall knows the story of the high school and the tornado that took a good part of it away. The high school was not in the part of Marshall that was the Marshall when the Gypsy Queen was here. And that's another story that's really fascinating, but could be true. Who knows? But in any case, we went to the old Marshall High School. That was where we had junior high, the 7th and 8th grade. About that time, I graduated out of the Cub Scouts into the Boy Scouts, and was a Boy Scout all through junior high and high school. And just inject that I went to Camp Cretenstein as a camper the first year I was eligible which is between the 7th grade and the 8th grade. And I did something right at camp because at the end of the first week as a camper, I was invited to come back for the rest of the summer as junior staff and wash dishes and help prepare the meals and was able to be a camper and got paid for the rest of the summer. And then the next year, which would have been the summer between my 8th grade and freshman year, I think it was, I went to the Boy Scout Jubilee Jamboree, or the Boy Scout Jamboree in Irvine Ranch, California. And while we were there, we heard Vice President Nixon talk, and I don't think President Eisenhower talked, but we were there for that. Then my summer between my sophomore and junior year, I went to Philmont Scout Ranch on a very special 36-day leadership training program, and we spent 36 days in the wilderness. Didn't have tents. We had to build huts out of thatched pine boughs. We hiked 175 miles in 9 days, carried all our equipment with us, and our assistant scoutmaster was a Marine. And he said, "You will be men when you leave here." and oddly enough, I gained 15 pounds in that little trip.
You didn't go into any caves then either, did you?
No, we didn't go into caves, but we sure climbed a lot of mountains and scaled some cliffs in a way, if you will.
But that would have been a wonderful experience.
Oh,
not for just the health side of it, but the exposure and contact
The
with other people.
exposure, and there were this particular program called the Junior Leaders Training Program. There were 36 guys in our troop, and we came from something like 28 different states.
Oh wow!
So we had scouts from all over the United States that were in this group, and you learned survival in the wilderness. We actually fought a forest fire. You learned. We went on a compass course one day where we were set loose, and we were given a set of coordinates, and we hiked cross country in the mountains all day long to get to where we were supposed to go. And if we hadn't been able to do that, we'd have been lost. And we wound up, we came up about 3 feet from where we were supposed to be.
That was before GPS too, wasn't it?
We had compasses.
Sure.
Yes, we had compasses and a map, and we knew how to pace ourselves and knew how far we walked. And it was quite an experience. And then the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, I was selected to go to the World Boy Scout Jubilee Jamboree in Sutton Coldfield, England. And that was the 50th anniversary of Scouting and the 100th anniversary of Lord Baden-Powell, who was a founder of Scouting. And we actually met and talked with Lady Baden-Powell, almost one-on-one conversation. I was with a group of about 15 other guys, and we sat with Lady Baden-Powell and talked. And I have a picture of the Queen of England and Prince Philip. I was about as far as I was probably 20 feet from them when I took their picture, and then played my trumpet for the Queen of England.
And amazing, she is still the Queen of England.
And she is
after
still the
these
Queen
years.
of England. She was absolutely gorgeous back then. We thought and she came to visit the boys. And after that, after the Jubilee Jamboree was over, we toured the continent and just had an incredibly good time. And interestingly, I said I played my trumpet for the Queen of England. Well, that's partly true. I was in the Band of America. The 1,760 guys from the United States were selected to go to the World Jubilee Jamboree. And in that group of scouts, there were several members who played instruments. So we had the Band of America, and our band played for the Queen at a soccer game, at a soccer match that we went to. But I had told the guys in the band that I knew a guy named Lee Butcher who was just an incredible trumpet player. And I might have just embellished too much maybe, and weren't quite sure that such a guy existed. But when we were in Paris, France, we were invited to the ambassador's mansion for a weenie roast. And hundreds and hundreds of scouts were there for the weenie roast, and we were lined up, around the block waiting to get in. And just as we were getting ready to get in, the Air Force band was playing. We knew that. This guy got up and took off on a trumpet ride. I said, "My God, that's Lee Butcher." And the comments were sure. And we walked into the gate, and it was Lee Butcher playing. And
He was in my class.
Yeah, yeah. And Lee saw me, and he just put his trumpet down and came out and gave me a big hug, and he and I toured around Paris. It was quite a treat to see him over there. Anyway, then back to high school, I guess. I was, like every other kid, I was involved in the band and the chorus. And Vaughn Arney was our band director, and just an incredible person.
You played trumpet then, I guess.
I played trumpet.
Anything else?
No, just the trumpet. But I was in several different singing groups. And we just were very involved there. I was in the class plays, okay, and I took all the math and science courses I could, and once again in the high schools, the kids were considered teachers. We didn't backtalk, and we learned. We learned more about our country. We learned civics. We learned about how our government works, the branches of the government, and what they meant, and the checks and balances which are supposed to be there.
What was your favorite subject in school?
I didn't have a particular favorite subject. My favorite subjects were math and physics, and probably chemistry. But my English teacher for 3 years was Miss Geyser, Wilma Geyser, and she was an absolute mechanic of the English language, and the things that she taught us I retained to this day, and learned the parts of speech and how to put sentences together. And
My wife said she was the influence that caused her to go in teaching in English.
well, I'm sure if your wife did that, Miss Geyser would have had a
Oh, yeah.
huge impact on that, because she was so good, and just really loved her. She was great. Mr. Callis was my chemistry teacher and my math teacher, and he was one of my favorite teachers. He and Miss Geyser, and Mr. Hornbrook and Mr. Arney, I guess you'd have to say, were my 4 favorite teachers. They were just awesome. Mr. Arney had such an incredible impact on the students of Marshall. We're a small farming community, okay? And we had at that time maybe 380 students in the high school, if that many. We had over 200 students in the music department. That's just unheard of.
Top. That's top net,
Yes. Yeah.
top drawer.
Yeah. And we were good. I mean, we sang classical music. We played classical music, and it was pretty awesome. And I think every kid who was involved in the music department or in the music program gained an awful lot from it.
And you remember it today, too.
Oh,
right?
remember today. I remember the songs we sang, and it was special. Okay, that's all I can say.
Did you have a subject in school that you really didn't like?
No, I love school.
Okay.
I mean, that was my passion. I can't think of any particular course I didn't like. There were some where I thought we could have learned more. And I had algebra or geometry from Mr. Hornbrook, and from time to time he'd have to leave, and he'd let me teach the class while he was gone. And that was fun. And I wound up teaching in college, and then teaching college after I graduated from graduate school. So I think that's where I learned to really have a passion for teaching.
About what year then did you say bye-bye to Marshall High School?
Well, I graduated in 1958.
Okay.
Just celebrated our 60th high school class reunion a couple of weeks ago. And after I graduated from high school, I would go back and I would say that in the scouting program, that was also a very important part of my life. I became an Eagle Scout.
Okay.
I was Order of the Arrow, and as I say, I was selected to go to the World Jubilee Jamboree, selected for the junior leader training camp at Philmont, and I was on the staff at Camp Cretenstein. I was a provisional scoutmaster, and I was also the assistant nature director. I worked with Dr. Dewey Weir from DePaul University. He was the nature director, and worked very closely with him, and he taught me an incredible amount about nature, about botany, and so on. Could identify easily 60 trees and many different grasses and so on.
Stay away from the poison ivy.
Actually, I wasn't allergic to poison ivy. So one of the summers that I was on the staff, we wanted to be away from the campers. So we pitched our tent in a huge patch of poison ivy because we knew that we wouldn't be bothered. Well, that was the time my old body decided it was no longer going to be allergic to poison ivy. Swelled up like a blimp. I had it all over me. I learned my lesson, I guess. But that was funny. But scouting was very important. And as a matter of fact, I think scouting was the basis for my doing what I did in the military. I think that training that I got on scouting carried over to the military. After I graduated from high school, I went to Purdue University and majored well, I was basically an engineering student, but I was, as an extracurricular, I was on the Purdue drill team, and this was at a time when the military was treated with respect. It was before the Vietnam War, shortly after Korea was over. And the Purdue drill team was a pretty incredible organization. We were actually the National Collegiate Champion drill team. This was a time when drill team, most every college that had an ROTC program had a drill team, and we had drill meets all over the United States where different colleges would get together to have a drill meet, and Purdue never lost the competition. We won every one we ever went to, and then every year there was a National Collegiate Championship drill meet in Washington D.C. and about 100 drill teams from across the country participated every year. My sophomore year, our team had been invited by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to march in the courtyard of the Pentagon for him and his staff, and we did. And that was the year that one of the judges for the drill meet was the commanding officer of the Army Honor Guard. And when we finished our presentation, at the end of each presentation, each team marches to the end of the floor, stops, and then is addressed by the judge. And the commanding officer of the Army Honor Guard addressed us after we marched. He said, "Gentlemen, without question, yours is the finest drill team I have ever seen."
Oh.
And we won the national championship. The next year, the Purdue drill team, at the invitation of President Kennedy, marched for him in the Rose Garden in D.C.
Has that kind of record continue to be? Are they still maintaining that, or do you know?
There are no longer,
Excuse me.
no longer drill teams. The drill team was disbanded.
I didn't think so.
And it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
When Vietnam came along, people had a very big disdain for the military. So drill teams went to the way of the dinosaur.
So you were an engineering major then?
Yes,
At
yes.
Purdue?
Yeah. And then I transferred to Indiana State to help my dad in his filling station. He was getting older. And I finished up at Indiana State and wound up having a major in physics and a major in math. And at that point in time, I went to the officers training school after graduation from Indiana State, and was commissioned in November of 1963, and served as a radar automations engineer, radar automations officer, maintenance officer, until I was discharged in 1968, and served at Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. That was my first duty assignment after officers training school. Then I went to Keesler Air Force Base for board training. Then I went to Opheim Air Force Station, Montana, which is a remote site 4 miles south of the Canadian border, and was there for 2 years, and was the communications, the electronics maintenance
So you were in the
officer.
Air Force then?
Yes, I was in the Air
Okay.
Force for 5 years, and I left, and while I was at Opheim Air Force Station, my dear wife and I were married, and then after we left Opheim Air Force Station, we went to Arlington Heights Air Force Station in Chicago, actually in Arlington Heights,
Okay.
and it was the we were a tenant organization at the 45th Artillery Brigade headquarters, and my radar systems fed the Nike Hercules sites for the Chicago, Gary, Milwaukee Air Defense Sector. And so it was an important job, and it was right during the middle of the Vietnam War and the Cold War. And when I was at Opheim, I'd go to higher headquarters, 20th Air Division headquarters for meetings from time to time, and I'd go into our composite command center, and every day we watched the bear come across the North Pole, and saw on the radar system, saw our F-102 fighters scramble, take off, and intercept the bear and drive him back home. I mean, it was some very tense times,
I'm sure.
and it was, I think, an important job.
Now, in Glenview, Illinois had a Navy Center, as I recall.
Yes.
It's no longer active, it's no longer there.
Yeah.
But was there any connection or anything involved between the two? And then, of course,
Not really.
the Navy base was on up at...
Yeah, the Navy base was up near the lake.
Yeah.
We didn't interact with them particularly.
Okay.
We interacted with the Army because we were a tenant organization in their headquarters. So, but that's what I did basically in the military, and it was a very satisfying time of my life.
So you'd say generally is involved with communications? and it was like a lot.
I was a communications electronics maintenance officer. I was in charge of all the operation of basic our long-range radar sites. When we were in Montana, we surveyed something like 250,000 square miles of the southern Canada and northern United States, and looking for encroachment by the Russians. We had B-52 bombers at Glasgow Air Force Base, which is about 50 miles south of us, and they were loaded with nuclear weapons on a daily basis, flying, and people, I don't know if they knew that at that time, but probably not. But we had nuclear weapons in the air 24/7.
Now, Keith, there was a period of time, and I think it was about that vintage when they built these underground silos
Yes,
with the nuclear equipment in those.
yes.
None of those are used anymore, are they?
No, no. Well, no, that's not quite true. I think, I don't know for
I
a
don't
fact.
either.
I do know that we have ballistic missiles. Now, whether they're in silos, I don't know. I think probably they are.
Was it just a matter of the more modern equipment has technologically superseded what those would do?
We haven't updated our nuclear arsenal in a very long time. There's still some pretty old equipment out there. There has been updating, but most of our arsenal now appears to be in the nuclear submarines and in the Air Force. The B-2s, the B-1Bs, and the B-52s are still flying and will be for quite some time yet. The old saying is that the last B-52 pilot hasn't been born yet. And it's an incredible airplane. And so anyway, then I think that brings it up to the end of my Air Force career. And I said that when I was at Opheim Air Force Station, we got married. Well, actually, I married my bride, Linda Mitchell, now Linda Mitchell Miller, and she was Dr. Mitchell's and Millie Mitchell's daughter. And we've now celebrated our 53rd wedding anniversary this summer. And she was an Air Force wife then for a little over 2 years. And after the Air Force, we went to the University of Oklahoma for graduate school, and that was in June of 1968. And we had lived in Norman, Oklahoma, the home of the University of Oklahoma, pretty much ever since. There were periods when I was elsewhere, but mostly we've lived in Norman, Oklahoma. And at University of Oklahoma in graduate school, it was just an incredible time of my life. I wound up getting my master's degree in engineering physics, and then I worked on my PhD in theoretical physics, and I'm an ABD, all but dissertation. My major professor left when I was halfway through my dissertation, and was not able to finish because he was going, and no one else wanted to do what I was doing. I was doing work working on tachyons, those theoretical particles which go faster than the speed of light, and it was it was quantum mechanics, and it's kind of specialized.
So you were teaching then at the university too, right?
I was a graduate assistant. I taught physics when I was there.
Okay.
And then my teaching at the university, I was asked to come and teach courses in calculus and advanced engineering mathematics. And I was working full time, but I taught at night time for several years, teaching mostly advanced engineering mathematics. And one of the reasons I think why I did that was I was a theoretician, okay? I was a theoretical physicist. And I had enough math to also have a major in math. I had, I don't know, probably 20 hours of math as a graduate student, in addition to all of the courses in physics. So I taught the math, and I was able to bring to that the theory that you have to learn how to solve the problems, but then I had the practical experiences as a working engineer, so I could decompose the answers, which were solutions to the equations, and teach how this works in the world. How as an electrical engineer do you apply the solution of this equation to make your circuits work? And then they also have application in mechanical engineering. So I was able to bring the practical side of theory of advanced engineering math to the students, and that was very good. They enjoyed that.
Did you enjoy being in the classroom?
Oh, loved it. Absolutely loved teaching. It was quite a thrill. It was quite a thrill to see eyes get big and say, aha.
Eureka.
Yeah, eureka. And I about 2 years ago, I had a guy come up to me at a meeting at OU, and he had been one of my students about 15 years earlier, and he came up to me and made a silly comment that I had made in class one time. And it was, what's a constant among friends? And they were having a problem with assigning constants to a series of equations. And I finally just said, well, what's a constant among friends? And for some reason, that caught on, and they understood what I was talking about. This guy, 15 years later, came up and said, what's a constant among friends? That would
make it worth it.
Yeah. So I truly enjoyed teaching. My career, after graduate school, I started off as a geophysicist with Mobil Oil, and then Sun Oil Company hired me to be one of their research geophysicists in their labs in Richardson, Texas. So I did that and worked for them.
What oil company was it?
Huh?
What oil?
That was Sun Oil Company.
Sun Oil?
It was a company that bought DX.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, with Sun Oil Company. So I worked as a research geophysicist for Sun Oil Company in Richardson, Texas, and didn't really like living in Texas.
Imagine that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Texans down there. And an opening came open with Sun Oil Company in Oklahoma City, which was back home, for a petroleum engineer. And I said, hey, I want to try out, I want to do that. And the comment was, well, you're not a petroleum engineer. I said, watch me. So they sent me up for an interview, and I went up to Oklahoma City and interviewed, and by golly, got the job as a petroleum engineer, and worked for Sun for about, I think 2 or 3 years as a petroleum engineer, and basically as a production engineer, and spent a small amount of time, about 6 months, on their training program, which every engineer who went to work for Sun did, and it was quite valuable. I learned a lot about the petroleum industry. At that time I was working for Sun, the industry was not inundated, but had many people who were called headhunters. And they were people who looked at different engineers. They would be hired by a company to find an engineer to come in and do a specific task.
Particular niche, wasn't it?
Beg pardon?
It was a particular niche.
Yes.
They were looking to put somebody. Yeah.
And I was recruited by Grace Petroleum. It's a small independent, to go to work for them, and I did. It was quite a promotion, and I became the chief water flood engineer for all of the water floods for Grace Petroleum in Oklahoma and Wyoming. And a water flood is a system of extraction of oil. You have a field that has been produced primarily to the point where it doesn't really produce oil anymore, but there's still an incredible amount of oil in the ground. So you determine which wells in that field would be producing wells, of which wells would be injection wells. And into those injection wells, you injected salt water from the formation for which the oil of interest came. You pump that salt water back into the ground, into your injection wells, and as you did so, that water would push the oil toward the producing wells, and you enhanced production and got production for many, many more years. And it's a very complex issue. There's a multitude of tasks that go on. You have to equip the injection wells. You have to design and lay out all of the piping systems that gets the water from the production equipment to an injection facility, from the injection facility to the injection wells, all without having saltwater spills and so on. And that's,
Has that been a controversial thing as far as water supplies of houses and people and towns?
not really.
Okay.
In Oklahoma, people knew what secondary recovery water flooding was, and they knew how important it was. And an issue also is fracking wells.
Yeah,
Everybody
I
talks
wondered
about,
about
oh, fracking is such a horrible thing. Well, actually, not a single well in this country or any place in the world, for the most part, will produce if you don't fracture it. And what that means is you pump water in under high pressure, and it fractures the rock in which the oil resides.
Releases
And,
it.
and then into the fractures, you pump sand. Special kind of sand, okay? And sometimes it's not really sand, it's little, like almost like little BBs, little steel balls. And then you stop fracturing, and you stop pumping, and just shut the well in, and the formation then will collapse onto those sand particles or little particles of metal, and those particles have a lot of porosity. They allow fluid to flow through them, and so the water or the oil in the reservoir and the oil in the reservoir then come to the fractures that are filled with sand because they're lower pressure than the formation is, and they flow back to the wellbore. And without fracturing, oil will not travel long distances through the formation readily. It will flow, but it takes years and years, to flow very far. So you fracture the well to give yourself channels through which that oil and water flow. And in every reservoir in which you find oil, there's also connate water, or water, the seawater, because oil is basically formed at the bottom of the ocean. And as you put layers and layers and layers of stuff on it, then that which turns into oil is trapped in a given formation.
Keith, we read a lot about oil sands, primarily, I guess, in Canada.
The Athabasca tar sands.
Yeah.
Damien, I have not, I was out of the oil industry before that got started. And one of the things is you've got this very, very heavy viscous oil in these tar sands. That's what they call them. They're tar. The oil is very viscous. It's like tar. They're very prolific, but the oil is not particularly good oil. It has things in it that are not good for man. One of the new trends is drilling into shale. Mm-hmm. Shale is very, very non-porous, and when I talk about being porous or porosity, it's consider that a formation is the formation rock is like a sponge, a very dense sponge. Well, the fact that the sponge holds water, that's the porosity. And then the permeability is the ability of that fluid in the pore spaces to flow from one point to another point. You've got to have both porosity and permeability. And believe it or not, your granite countertop has porosity and permeability. Water will flow through that under great pressure. And when we're talking great pressure, we're talking thousands of pounds per square inch of pressure to make that oil move. So we don't see that in the kitchen.
Hope not.
Yeah, but that's what it, and so fracking is not, in and of itself, is not bad. And without it, we won't have oil. Now, one of the things that I think oil companies haven't done that they should have done, they should have been channeling a lot of their research monies toward alternate energy sources like wind power, like solar panels and so on. We need we can't continue polluting our planet. We're last weekend, I think it was, every major city, every major reporting station reported the highest temperatures they had ever reported. Every place on the whole planet in one day, highest temperatures ever. The science is there, the technology is there to prove the science, and the data is there. We have global warming being caused by man, and a good part of that is burning fossil fuels, certainly coal.
We just visited northern Michigan and we saw a lot of wind generators.
Yes.
In Iowa, there's a lot of them. Texas, they're coming up everywhere. But also we were out in Vermont, and I swear it seemed like every other house had a solar grid on the roof.
Yeah.
Everywhere, and you don't
Yeah.
see that much around here.
Yeah, you don't see you don't see them a lot of places. They are in fact becoming more common. You see a lot of solar farms all over the country now. The wind farms, my goodness, you drive west out of Amarillo, Texas, and all the way to the state line. You've got a continual windmill farm. It's amazing. And one of the things that we have to do is we have to learn how to store energy. Because sometimes they will generate power for the grid, and the grid doesn't need the power, so you just waste it.
And
Or you turn the windmills off.
if it's not turning either, then you don't have any.
Yeah, it's not making, but they feather the propellers to where they won't turn when they don't need the power. But we need to be working on alternate energy sources.
You think there's going to be more and more electric cars?
Oh, I think so, without question. And I think I don't really want to get into talking about where technology is heading. That's another whole issue. It's really kind of scary. We're building things that I think are more of a problem to humanity than they're solving. We're able to put people out of jobs with robots, and you put enough people out of jobs with robots, and they won't be able to afford to buy food. And that's an issue. So we've got to somehow be able to come together as a group of intelligent people and make decisions as to what we should and shouldn't be doing. I don't know if that's going to happen. I know one of the problems is an engineer, a scientist studies something and learns how to do something, and they're going to do it. I mean, that's what it's all about. But at some point in time, they've got to learn, I think, my opinion, but I think they need to learn when to say enough is enough. I mean, we're talking about cars now so interdependent on computer networks and interfacing with the network that people can actually hack cars now and cause them to crash. And they've done that. Mm-hmm. And do you want to be driving down the highway and all of a sudden somebody take control of your car and speed it up to 100 miles an hour and drive it into a bridge? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. But that's what people can do now. So we need to be able to
It seems like this whole computer generation almost is getting almost to the point of scary.
Yeah, it is totally scary. Totally scary. So after I left Grace Petroleum, I went other places. I at one time was working for a company called GHK. GHK was the company, and we pioneered the deep drilling wells down to 30,000+ feet for high pressure gas. And I at one time was a drilling engineer in the deepest well in the world. That was quite an experience. We were drilling to some 33,000 feet. Wow. And insane conditions. We were talking about bottom hole pressures approaching 30,000 pounds per square inch. We were talking about temperatures that approached, 500 degrees. And we were our drilling mud was made out of diesel fuel. So you have this thousands and thousands of gallons of diesel fuel coming to the surface, circulating through open tanks that's got a temperature of 400 degrees. And any spark, and you just
See that?
blow things got hot.
Sure.
It's a very, very dangerous job. And then when the petroleum industry died, I left that and went to work as a software engineer in the B-1B bomber at Tinker Air Force Base, and that was, to say the least, exciting. Can't talk about what we did, but we worked on all the software systems that drive the different systems of the B-1B bomber. And after that, I went to work for a consultancy that worked for the FAA. We consulted with them on various issues, and working at the FAA, working as a consultant, I wrote 3 books on radar principles for the FAA, and well, radar principles and operation of one of the new radar systems, which was a modification of one of the radar sets, and then test plan procedures for new sets coming out. And as a result of that, they hired me. So I wound up working for the FAA for 15 years
I thought you did.
as a radar automations engineer, and very satisfying. It was made some important things happen. I was sent to Washington D.C. for 2 years to work on issues with our radar systems after 9/11, and that was really interesting. We traveled all over the country working with different people, Boeing and Lockheed Martin and different agencies in the government, to try to resolve some of the problems that we had. Why did 9/11 happen? Why didn't we understand what was happening? We knew where those airplanes were. We knew where they were headed, but nothing was done for various and sundry reasons, and I think that's changed now. Hope it has. Yeah. So that sort of in a nutshell.
So somewhere along there, you said, I'm going to retire and start taking a little easier. You decided to retire?
Yeah, I retired and discovered that I don't have any idea how I had time for a full-time job. I'm still active at OU. I'm on the.
So what year did you actually officially retire?
Oh, I retired in 2005.
Okay.
No, from the FAA, but I'm on the board of visitors of the College of Engineering. I'm board of advisors of the engineering physics program, and I went to work with a company from Denmark after I retired from the FAA, and worked for them for several years. We designed and built specialized equipment for the air traffic control world and marketed it worldwide. And that was interesting. They were a group of just incredibly nice people.
Just the last couple of days, there have been so many things on news about the shortage of air pilots for the airline industry. And I mean, this seemed like it came right out of the woodwork. Is that something that's really happened that rapidly?
I don't know. I haven't really kept up with what's going on in that sector. I've got other things that are going on. I know that a lot of the Trump administration has relaxed a lot of requirements for what pilots have to be able to do.
Well, they were, yesterday on the news, they were interviewing, I was an instructor or a couple of students from Indiana State, which has quite an airline program anymore. Anyway, they had found out that there are big increases in salary, starting salaries, up to $60-some thousand, I think, to start with. So that was kind of a, I guess, a thing, maybe a wake-up call.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why the shortage exists. Part of it is, I think, is the fact that I'm not sure that the military has as many pilots as they used to have, and a lot of the pilots who flew for the commercial airlines were former military pilots.
Yeah, but that's
and they were a big source, actually.
I can see that.
And so you reduce your number of people in the production line, and you lose pilots. And the pilots in the commercial airlines, they have to retire. I think we're at 60.
60,
I think it's 60,
Yeah.
and which is it's a hard call.
Well,
It's a hard call. Like the guy who saved that airline there was a movie about it, and I can't remember the person's name, but he had to retire very shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
because he was at the limit. Yet his experience and his ability gained from that experience was the only thing that saved those people's lives. So we get rid of them.
it's in the Hudson River, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, now you've gone through all of this and quite an interesting background. What are you doing in retirement? You said you're still active at the school. You must have some hobbies and things that you're active
Oh,
with.
well, yeah, I design and build furniture. And I actually parlayed that into a stint at OU in the College of Architecture, teaching furniture design and teaching the students how to use equipment and how to build the things that they have designed. So that was fun. That was really fun. I enjoyed that. So I designed furniture and build it. And
Wood furniture like cabinets or upholstered furniture, or
No.
tables and chairs, or
flat furniture,
okay.
cabinets, desks, tables, bookcases.
Okay.
I don't do chairs, and I don't do upholstered furniture.
Okay.
But tables and chairs and cabinetry and so on, I do that. And things like build decks. So
Are you doing anything with your music now? You mentioned the trumpet earlier.
no, I simply listen. There's a limit to what you can do. You know, you've only got so much time. So I haven't played my trumpet in a number of years. I just there wasn't time, and when I was working in the petroleum industry, I was working 6, 7 days a week, 14, 15-hour days for years and years and years, because it was a hard job. It was a lot going
Time to
on.
turn that off then.
Huh?
Time to turn that off.
Yeah, well, then I went to the FAA, and I spent lots of time working there too, because I was the initial project manager on bringing different systems online, and that was really time consuming. Really took a lot of time and a lot of it. You work with people all over the country,
Sure.
and it was satisfying. It was satisfying to make things happen.
You started in Marshall. Now you're in Norman, Oklahoma.
Yes.
Is Norman your permanent home now, you'd say?
Oh, I think so. As I say, we moved there in 1968
Yeah.
to start graduate school, and for the exception of that short stint in Dallas as a geophysicist, and then I went back to Dallas one more time for about a year and a half, working for an international petroleum engineering consulting firm, and then came back to Oklahoma into another consulting firm, International Petroleum Engineering Consulting firm. I came back as an executive vice president for that, and that was very satisfying. But the oil industry died, and we just shut our door one day because the people who were hiring us had pulled in their horns too. And so as a result of that, I went elsewhere. And as a result, it was a result of the fact that my master's was in engineering physics. I was prepared to work in almost any engineering field because of the background in physics.
Through Marshall and all of your career, is there someone who's really influenced you maybe more than anyone else, or maybe even decided or helped you decide on what career to take?
I would have to say that my first wife has been just very supportive of me. Has any one particular person? I think that this, some people would say this isn't true, but I think it's true that people have aptitudes for doing what they do. And I guess I figured out that I was going to be an engineer or something like that when I took Grandma Lichtenberger's vacuum sweeper apart to see what made it work and put it back together. That was when I was in probably the second grade.
You didn't have any spare parts left?
No spare parts left. And I've always had the propensity for the sciences. I've always been inquisitive. And was there any one particular person? I mentioned a while ago 4 teachers in high school who were people who encouraged one to think, one to be creative. In undergraduate school, I had a few teachers who were, well, actually I had 3 teachers and none at Purdue, which really, because times were different back then. Students didn't interact with faculty. At Indiana State, I interacted very strongly with one of my English professors, one of my government professors, and one of my physics professors. And they were just super people who, again, encouraged you to think. And then in graduate school, my major professor, with whom I still associate, was just, I mean, we clicked.
Is there some, I guess, important or significant historical event somewhere in the past that really kind of has influenced your thinking?
There were things that happened in history that were very important. The Vietnam situation, the Vietnam War, I was in the middle of that. That played a significant role in understanding, I think, the world politic. The space program was extremely fascinating. It simply, I don't think I could say it solidified my interest in science. It just enhanced it. One of the things that I think caused me to be in the petroleum industry was when I was in graduate school working on a PhD in theoretical physics. President Nixon axed the space program, basically.
That's right.
And it was pretty much shut down a lot of what NASA did. And as a result of that, the market for people with degrees in physics just dried up, just dry the bone. And I was nearing the end of graduate school, and there was a notice that came out that Mobil Oil was interviewing, and they would in fact interview physicists. And they were the first company in about 2 years that had said they would interview a physicist for anything. So I interviewed, and lo and behold was offered a job, and I took it, because as I said, the people in physics just didn't have jobs. So that was an important event, I think.
Turning point.
Yeah. And that's what probably kept me out of being an academic as opposed to being a practicing engineer. But I have to say that the things I did in engineering were all exciting and extremely interesting. I mean, it's you learn so much. What's interesting is that when you're working in a given area, you observe things that you don't even see as a non-petroleum engineer. We were in Oklahoma for 5 years in graduate school, okay? I knew there were oil wells in Oklahoma because you saw those things going up and down. I had no idea where the petroleum industry was. But once I became one, they were on every corner. And you see so many different things when you're involved in something. And you learn that every endeavor has its own special set of rules and consequences and tricks of the trade that you just don't realize until you become involved, and that enhances your love of the physical world. You might say of physics, of math. You say, my goodness, I didn't know that. Isn't that interesting? Like, as a simple example, you take a screw and put a nut on it. Why isn't that neat? In the oil industry, we put together casing strings that went in a hole that weighed 2 million pounds, that was subjected to 30,000 pounds of pressure and corrosive environments and temperatures that are just unbelievable. And you have to have a connector, a joint that you can screw together that will be pressure tight to 30,000 pounds per square inch, will support 2 million pounds of hanging weight. And the technology and science of designing such a coupling, such a connector, is incredible. And if you're not there, you don't see that, and you don't know that. And then you look at what goes on in radar. My goodness, the stuff that's happening in radar right now. We have people at OU. Dr. Bob Palmer has one of the best, most scientifically advanced radar teams in the world. And then the stuff that he's designing to do weather observations, to enable meteorologists to predict the weather, looking at the data, looking at what they can see now.
Well, so much of this stuff with the self-driving car and the things with safety on the cars seems to be radar and camera oriented.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of camera, a lot of radar, and the firmware that talks to each other. I mentioned earlier these hearing aids. This little hearing aid weighs a gram, not very much. Has 24 separate channels of amplifiers. it has digital to analog conversion. When I was in the Air Force, our radar signals were analog. We converted them to digital data for transmission to higher headquarters for them to mosaic with all the other radar sets that fed them. Our analog to digital converter that did all this was in a cabinet 8 feet tall, 10 feet wide, 30 feet long. I now have a thing that fits in a thing that fits behind your ear that does that much. So the advances in the study of solid state physics that allows you to develop the kinds of materials that will allow these kinds of calculations, operations to take place, millions of seconds.
And it's still going too, the development. I think we don't know where it's going to go.
In 2020, we will generate more data in an hour than has been generated from then back to the beginning of when data was being generated. That's how much stuff we're doing, and it's all taking place with the development, the finding the research to make smaller and smaller computers and different kinds of computers, and how do I communicate, and how do I make things switch, how do I switch it, make it switch, turn on and off a million times a second.
Boggles the mind.
Boggles the
It really
mind.
does.
Yeah, that's an exciting time in a way.
With the, I guess the past and all, and that you've had a very, very background. We've got so many mechanical things and all around us all the time. Is there something you'd say, I just could not live without that?
Well, I think we all become dependent upon almost everything we have. I couldn't live right now without my hearing aids because I'm almost totally deaf without them. When I was in Scouts, I went to junior leader training camp at Philmont Scout Ranch. We lived in New Orleans for 36 days. So I've done that. I know how to do that. I know how to live without, probably need matches, but I've sparked things together to make fire start. So, but there are just, we look and everything we do, our means of communication, which is, it is important that we be able to communicate with each other. We are able to do it now over great distances. Couldn't do that before. Is that important? Can we live without it? Okay, here's a story. If in fact there were to be an EMP over our country, a massive EMP. And EMP stands for electromagnetic pulse. It's a pulse of intense radio waves generated by the blast of a nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. And that EMP, that intense, massive, strong electromagnetic field will wipe out our entire electrical grid.
Mm-hmm. Totally heard.
And as a result, there'll be no lights, no power,
Nothing.
no food being produced. You can't fix the system because you can't communicate with the people who make the stuff what you need. They don't know where it's needed. They can't make it anyway because they don't have any equipment to make it. So everything that we have right now, our civilization is tied to the things that make the things that we use. And without those things, we hundreds of millions, billions of people could not survive. Billions of people can't grow their own food.
I think you're saying the basics of that too is electronic.
It's
Electric pulse.
electronic.
Yeah.
Electronics, electricity is a power, is a driving power
Keeps us all going.
that keeps us all going. And you destroy your electrical grid, and you very well destroy your civilization. Because you can't pump the gasoline or the diesel fuel to make your tractors run.
Can't even get through the door at the grocery store.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
all electronic.
Yeah, it's electronic.
Keith, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I think we could probably go off on several different directions and end up 2 or 3 more hours.
Yeah, could do that.
But I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and your time to sit down and visit with us. Because I've said everyone has a story, and what we're talking about today, you'd say, well, it may not be today or tomorrow, but somewhere someone's going to say, gee, I didn't know that about Keith Miller.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too.
Good.
And off the record, we ought to get together sometime and have coffee and talk.
I love it. I love it. But I really appreciate your taking the time.